Let me start by saying that we discuss a lot of tech, a lot of emerging stuff. It's all very cool. I focus more on the mundane task of how do I secure a massive organization. And I'm a little bit worried about how things are going, to be honest. But I'll introduce myself. I'm Greg Gaast. I've been doing this cyber thing for about 22 years. I started out in a group called Millworm, which is, along with Anonymous and Kevin Mitnick, was ranked one of the most infamous hacker collectives of all time. Back in the late 90s, we had the biggest mass hack of all time, and there was a little thing about a nuclear weapons program that got me mentioned by the UN National Security Council. After that, some men in suits came to my house. I was never charged with anything. I was never read my Miranda rights, but I was put in the back of a van and then into a cell. I don't know where this cell was to this day. A few days later, they came to visit again. It's nice. And they made me an offer, a job offer I could not refuse. They were really adamant about the not refuse part. Spent about 3 years with them doing stuff I can't really go into detail with about. But part of that may have been some offensive capability, and part of that was, we're talking about the late 90s here. So we're talking about, we kind of became this focal point for whenever the government got breached, people would hear about our little outfit and come talk to us. And in these 3 years, I saw not 200, but not far off 200 breaches. Add that to the X 100 that I had caused myself previously. After a while, well, 9/11 happened, and they started asking me to do even shadier stuff that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. So I went out in the public sector, got a job. They dropped me off on an Air Force base and told me to audit the National Defense Network. I didn't know what the word audit meant, but that's MSPs for you. I ended up working architecture for CGI, which is Canada's biggest MSP, hundreds of thousands of hosts, building all the security infrastructure on that. The Tactical Independent, I forget what it is, Theater Independent Tactical Army Air Force Network for NATO, for Kosovo and Afghanistan, did some contracting, made a lot of money. And eventually, after seeing all these breaches and all these organizations getting breached, I decided, well, how do I start managing all of this? How do I keep my organization from getting breached? Because, you know, ISO and NIST and all these places were certified, accredited, they were still getting breached and walked all over. So I started looking into how to do that, and that kind of became my forte. And I split my time between the University of Salford. I've got my own little advisory. I do some legal portfolio work, such as voiding your cyber insurance, M&A assessments, and I review contracts around security services, of which I've never seen a good one. Those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, I'm very big on leadership in information security. I think that's a real skills gap. Proactivity. I lecture at the university now, even more ironic as a high school dropout. I do a cybersecurity leadership course. I've got a book coming out. But most of all, I've been a witness to many, many breaches. So everyone loves graphs, so we have two. So I've got a graph of the gun ownership per capita rate in the States and the murder rate. I always get a couple of chuckles because it seems like there's a correlation there, right? And the funny thing is, if you go to America and you talk to people, there's a decent subset of the population that will argue, no, guns are good, guns are a deterrent, they deter crimes, and they've always got that one case where grandpa scared that burglar out of his farm, whatever. But holistically, no matter how much you give them the numbers, they won't accept it. And that's because of indoctrination. You keep hearing this, it's self-reinforcing within their circle of friends, it becomes an ideology, and no matter how factual you are with them, you can't get that through to them. So on the right, we've got information security spending, or investment, and the impact of breaches, so frequency and loss. And we're like, yes, that makes sense. You invest in security and incidents go down. The only problem is I've switched the graphs. That's the murder rate to gun ownership capital, and that's the effect InfoSec is having on breaches. And that seems very strange to everyone, except everyone in this room owns a knife. None of you have ever stabbed anyone? If you had a knife with you today, would you stab the person next to you? Not the vendors outside, the person next to you. Probably not. But if some maniac showed up at the door, wanted to kill you all, and you turned to him with a knife, you'd probably deter that from happening. So now the knives are saving lives. They're not taking them. There's no correlation. You have to look at the much bigger picture of what's causing these things. So what's causing this? Well, I like to use two analogies. The first one is the electrical junction box. So you imagine you have this junction box in your kitchen and it blows up. What do? You call an electrician. He comes, he fixes it. A week later, it blows up again. Got a terrible case of the shakes. You call him again. He fixes it again. A week later, it blows up again. This time he comes and tells you, you know what, I'm going to upgrade it. A little bit more money will get you a bigger, sturdier box. Sure enough, it lasts a month. Comes back again, and this keeps repeating itself. And before you know it, you've got this massive industrial-sized junction box on your kitchen wall. But it only blows up every few years. Then someone comes along, walks into your kitchen, and says, that's a big junction box. How long has that water pipe been leaking onto it? And this is the analogy I had to give someone on LinkedIn, because he was a security, virtual CISO, and all this stuff, his own consultancy and everything, when he was adamant that we shouldn't get involved in patching. We shouldn't get involved in asset management, because that's IT's job. And we shouldn't have to do all that extra work. And I'm like, but that's causing 95% of your work. Don't you want to fix that instead and not have to do all of this stuff? Impossible to convince him. And the analogy for the broader industry that I give is the car factory, where imagine you're standing out in the street, and in front of you, you've got this car factory. And on one side, you've got the big factory building. On the other side, you've got the big parking lot where they put the finished cars. So, sheet metal comes in, they stamp it into shape, they paint the bodies, they bolt on the engines, the transmissions, all the parts. And then they push it into the lot, but from the third floor. So all the cars come crashing down, and they're like, oh my God, quick, get this heap out of the way because there's more coming. Put it over there. Let's build some workshops. Let's assess what's broken. Let's assess what parts we need. How do we fix this? What's the procedure? What tooling do we need? Let's hire 1,000 more people because look at this, there's cars everywhere. Let's get some consultants in. Let's get some vendors to see if they can pitch some better tools. Let's put in some quality management frameworks or an automotive repair management system of some kind. And next thing you know, you've got thousands of people, vendors, consultants, all this stuff going on, millions in tooling. But you're sitting there like, why don't they just fix the assembly line? And you ask them, and they're like, you shut up. You don't know anything about repairing cars. And that's kind of the devolution of the information security industry that I'm seeing in the last 20 years. And the previous graph, this is actually the real data from it. And by the way, those graphs are CDC, Homeland Security, FBI, and National Protection, National Information, what is it? What's, Mike, I forget what it's called. NIPSI, National Infrastructure Protection Center, that's the one. All solid government data, and the Government Accounting Office is the other one, so all real data. In blue, we see InfoSec spending. It's going up. It's going up in absolute terms, but it's also going up as a percentage of IT spending. We're about 12% now and rising. Not really sustainable. And we're not exactly slowing down the increase of breaches or the size of them, are we? They're actually running away from us. And I call these our security pains, where we've got increasing security costs and budget pressures to keep doing all this stuff. The tooling and the automation gets more and more complex, so we need more and more focalized, in-depth skill sets to handle all this stuff. We've got a skill gap of 4,070,000 ISC squared numbers. I don't know where they got the 70,000. And despite all this, we have a growing number of breaches. But I don't think these are security pains at all. I think all of this is self-inflicted. If we look at, the analogy I'd give is an animal that's been abused all its life in a cage. You open the door, it doesn't come out. It retreats to the furthest corner of that cage because that's what it knows and it's comfortable with that. If we fix things proactively on the assembly line, when we see what actually causes breaches, and we'll get into that in a second, there's things far more upstream that we can fix that tremendously eliminate all of this. And there was an ISC squared presentation after mine in London a few months ago. They had a great slide, which they wouldn't let me have, that showed, I think, the top 15 or 20 of what these roles actually are that there's such a skills gap on. And every single one of them is a parking lot reactive role. It's a SOC analyst, it's an incident responser, it's a network engineer, network analyst. It's all detect and respond and investigate after the breach. There's no one in here going to engage the business, improve process, any of that. So the root causes of the last 5 biggest hacks I can think of, or breaches, is all extremely basic stuff. You didn't need AI-powered network detection to prevent these. Some people forgot to patch. Some people left S3 buckets open. Patching, asset management, architectural standards would have fixed or prevented all of these. We had drinks with a guy that investigated one of these breaches a few weeks ago, and they were investigating the breach, and at some point they got to this network switch, and they found something connected to it. The security team didn't know what it was. What do you reckon it was? Rogue access point? Raspberry Pi? An entire company they had bought 6 years before. They had no idea it was there. Hundreds of hosts. The Marriott one's interesting because they M&A'd a company that they bought, didn't detect a thing. 4 years later, they get breached. And you see 3 weeks after the breach, it's like, oh yeah, we lost X amount of records. Oh yeah, we also have 2 weeks after that, Y amount of passports. Another 3 weeks later, we're like, oh well, we've got Z amount of passports as well, but they were encrypted. Now that tells me you had no idea where your data was. It was in different formats. It was all over the place. You acquired this company 4 years ago. You'd not even figured out where stuff was, let alone start to standardize it or homogenize it and apply your controls. You hadn't done anything. What were you doing? Well, we were all chilling in the sock, watching football on the big screens. Equifax, simple patching. But people tell me, oh, but it wasn't just patching. Because they knew about the vulnerability, they knew about the patch, they patched it out, but they weren't aware of the existence of the system that got them breached. Well, then it's an asset management issue. And it's one more reason why you need to be proactive and address stuff upstream. So I think what we're really missing is care, it's curiosity, it's engagement. If you have a cup of coffee with people would have prevented more breaches than many, many, many million pounds of spending. So how do we get here? Well, you get like a disengaged technical culture. We love all the toys out there. We lack people and business alignment. I'll do audits with people and walk in there, do assessments, and you've got heads of InfoSec that have been there for 10 years. They can't name me what finance application their company uses. What are you protecting? How can you not know about the business you yourself are protecting? And Sun Tzu has this quote of, know thy enemy, know thyself, 1,000 battles, 1,000 victories. And it's the know thyself bit that we're falling on our face on. We have the home field advantage. We're always saying, oh, the attacker only has to be right once, we have to be right 100% of the time. It's like, yeah, but I only have to fix the vulnerability once to foil 1,000,000 attacks against it. So it works both ways, but you have to know your own organization. And that technical tunnel vision is the other one, where when the NSA says that no 0 days have been used in the last 24 months on any non-classified network that they monitor, but if I mention I'm not terribly concerned about 0 days, people lose their freaking minds. And they start coming out with these far-fetched abstract scenarios of, oh, we could set off an EMP in orbit and knock out this. It's like, you're not doing patching. And the same people, again, they don't know where 20% of their assets are. They haven't patched half the stuff in 6 years, or they think they have, but they've never bothered validating. Industry indoctrination, standardization. I think it's a real issue. We're trying to standardize all these roles and all these standards and all these best practices, but it's taking the thinking out of the whole thing. Stop trying to download standards off the internet and secure according to that standard, and start securing according to the organization you've got in front of your face. You can talk to people and find out exactly how it's working. Case in point, go back to the car factory example. If I hire a typical 10-year veteran CISSP and I put him on the ground, he's going to make a beeline for the parking lot and start changing body panels. If I hire a 21-year-old out of university, he's going to say, that assembly line thing is really stupid. I was like, attaboy, go fix that. We've got an inability to influence or engage. You hear this excuse of, oh, we're not on the board, blah, blah, blah. You. What's your name? Kristen. Yeah, you. Kristen. Tristan. Oh, sorry, I'm pointing at the guy before. Tristan. Can I buy you a cup of coffee after this, Tristan? There you go. Engagement done. That's literally all you need to do. Does your chief exec do like an annual address? Walk down, say, I enjoyed your talk, especially this, pay him a compliment, and then say, I'd like to have a cup of coffee with you. That's all you need to do. You don't even need to go near the boardroom. They're human beings. They leave the room sometimes. Toilets are outside. Increasing complexity, all these models, all these metrics. I think it's really disconnected from reality. I sit on like the club CISO chat, and there's so much time talking about metrics and how to convey this information. It's like the only metric I care about is on a scale from 1 to 10, you tell me how much you trust me to fix your problem. And if I've been engaging and proactive and altruistic and making my presence felt and just doing the best I can all the time, instead of spending half my time calculating how well I'm doing, I'm going to do a better job. And I've developed that trust, and I don't use anything I don't need, so they know when I ask for something, I need it, and they give it to you. I think we've got a general lack of accountability of what security does, because we can, again, we can be watching football in the SOC room, and no one knows. And I see a lot of that, especially in bigger companies. And a general lack of initiative of engaging upstream. And no one's calling us out on it. And I hosted a healthcare conference about a month and a half ago, and I was looking at the NHS, who's spending about £400 million on information security. Now we hear the 150 million headline in the news, but they were telling me the total project cost was about 400 million. And they're talking about, we're building SOCs, we're building this, we're putting this detection and response capability, blah, blah, blah. There was no mention of improving processes or doing patching or improving asset management, nothing. So you could have had the same overall level of assurance addressing a few fundamental issues further upstream for 50 million instead of 400 million, probably a lot less than that. That's 350 million pounds they're technically wasting. Now I ask you, how many nurses and doctors does that buy? And how many people are going to die? People are going to die because InfoSec sucked the resources out of the NHS. I think we should be concerned about that. My favorite example. I worked for a company, I had a client, we'll call them Company B. They outsourced most of their IT operations for part of their business to a Company C. I can't mention the name, but it rhymes with capita. It rhymes with capita. There you go. It's quite funny because I tell this story out of context, and people are just like, no, you're just full of crap. No way, no way, no way. And then I mention the C word, they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So they, Company C, in turn outsourced about 85% of this contract, about 600 servers, but about 500 of them they outsourced again to IBM. And I go in there to do an assessment, so I'm looking at the contract they have with my clients, and I'm looking at the contract they have with IBM, because they should balance each other. If you have this agreement with us, you should have this agreement with them. Well, I ask about SIEM. And the guys at Company C are like, well, IBM does that. They have all the servers. They handle it. So I'm like, okay, but what are they logging? What are they correlating? What's the reporting like? Who's doing it? What's the retention? What kind, can we drill down? They had no idea. So I call the IBM counterpart, and I was like, look, the SIEM you guys are doing on these 500 servers. Tell me, same questions, retention, correlation, reporting, what are we getting out of this? And the first reply I get is a question. And the question is, what do you mean 500 servers? To which my reply is, well, what do you mean? What do you mean 500 servers? And in the entire contract, I mentioned contracts, this environment of 499 servers, massive databases, front ends, dozens of different systems, applications, enterprise applications. In the contract, that whole shebang was called the application. So IBM's interpretation of that was web application. So I was like, okay, so you're only monitoring the web application. How many servers is that? 18. But there was another clause in the contract. And I don't think Company C was aware of this, because it said that any system that was end of life by the manufacturer wasn't supported. The service wasn't to be provided. About 2/3 of that environment was end of life. So I asked, how many of the 18 are end of life and therefore unsupported by you? And the answer is 18. Correct. This had been going on for 3.5 years at a cost of £25,000 per month. So I asked him, like, so we've been paying you for over the last 3.5 years just a hair over £1 million to monitor absolutely nothing. And IBM says, yes, that's the contract. And this is why IBM has the best contracting team in the business. Other stuff, and this is like one day, by the way, one day. Other stuff, every single server and desktop in there is missing patches, like going back 6 years, critical ones all over the place. But their patching process and infrastructure was so poor, for them it just showed up as, yeah, it's patched. But no one ever validated that the executables were installed. It was just not just a registry entry, or the asset management wasn't up to snuff. And their patching success rate was actually far, far lower. But then they would do vulnerability scan, see the vulnerability, and remove it from the report, saying, well, we've patched that server. And so it was just layer on top of layer of like exclusion. So when the client would get a report back, it was squeaky clean, basically, because of their own incompetence layered on top of their own incompetence. They had 45,000 undocumented firewall rules, but the best part was the documented ones, because I saw one in a change request, and it was something about an email service, and it had, you know, IP address to IP address, and then it said port number 9. And I was like, well, that's weird. That doesn't coincide with any port, that, you know, any email service I know about. So I do some digging, and I asked them, well, what's this port number 9? And, oh, no. That's the physical port on the switch. I'm like, what's the IP port? Oh, we don't use those. We just open all of them. And yet, BSI, KPMG, Big Four, ISO 27001, PCI, Gaast, all the good stuff for years. Then they had the website. The website was running on a version of Apache that was 2 years out of date. It was supposed to be updated, and they, oddly enough, screwed it up. They updated it to a version that was only 1.5 years out of support. So I was like, guys, no, we're not going ahead with this because it's a cluster, and I just don't trust it, and there's no point in upgrading from something end of life to something else that's end of life and risk the stability of the environment, especially with how bad your processes are. But, you know, this had been a change request, and some money had been spent. I went on vacation for a week, and I guess some of the execs from both parties went golfing, and they came to an agreement. Okay, you do this minor upgrade now. We'll do the bigger upgrade later on. For now, just do a vulnerability scan, and if there's no major issues detected, we'll go ahead with it. So a week later, I get back from vacation to this. I'll just let you see that. Did you ever get back from vacation and immediately need another vacation? So I'm like, what the fork? What happened here? It's like, well, we did this, and we did the vulnerability scan. And I'm like, well, this site doesn't run SSL, for starters, which you would have picked up the second you visited the site with your browser. You don't really need a vulnerability scanner for that. But I'm quite curious as to why your vulnerability scanner didn't pick that up, at least as an informational or something. So it turns out in the scanner, there's a setting, and it says, enable web vulnerability checks, with a little box, not ticked. Hadn't been ticked in at least 9 quarters. And they were paying 12 grand a pop for these vulnerability scans as well. So yeah, there you go. So how do you make it work? I do a 3-day leadership course. It takes 25 hours. I don't have time. But what I can tell you is to work on your organization. And you have to get to know your organization. And the best way of doing that is to engage fanatically. I mean, we're a massive university. Every time we get wind of some department or some little research lab a quarter mile away from here in some basement, we go and have coffee with them to find out what they're doing. The other piece is proactivity and altruism, like genuinely care and be curious and want the best for everyone. I lecture for free. I do a course that brings in more revenue than my salary for free. They paid me a small tutoring fee for that. I donated that back to the university. I try to place students. I go to companies that had struggled to place some of our students. I give them talks on how to mentor our students. This is all above and beyond, but it gets you noticed. You know, when you get like a 95% discount on a software, on a solution, and it saves the university nearly £500,000, well, the head of procurement calls you up wondering, what the hell is this? And then he laughs at the fact that you got 400-something thousand pounds off a solution, and then he tells the CFO about it, and these are the things that build up and get you a lot of traction eventually. Tailored and sustainable frameworks and programs. Stop relying on the stuff you're downloading off the internet, figuring out what works for you. Make a container around all your policies so you have them all in one box. Make sure they work together. Make sure that they are self-healing and cross-reinforcing. If something gets missed here, another process will pick it up there, that kind of thing. And business awareness and integration, so know about the business and know about the IT processes. And every chance you have, build your security into the IT or business process because they always get run. So your security will always get run. So you're not going to be like 11 months, 11 months chasing stuff and then a month before the auditor comes up, try to make everything pretty. It'll actually get run for you if you integrate it into the business. And seek out root causes. And most people, oh, well, it got compromised. What's the root cause? It was missing a patch. That's not a root cause. Why was it missing the patch? Was the patch process broken? Was the tool not working? Did we get a false positive, a false negative? Why do we have a tool that gives us that? Should we reevaluate our process for product selection? Go as far up as you want. Is it, oh, well, the patching process is fine, but we didn't catch it because we didn't know about the asset. Okay, well, let's review the asset process. Let's have every process feed into every other process as much as you can and really address as far upstream as possible. And the beauty of that is you have one issue, one incident. You fix the true root cause, or as high up as you can go for that incident. You end up fixing 1,000 others, but you'll also fix loads that you weren't even aware of. You'll fix issues where you have zero visibility, but they'll have gotten fixed because you addressed something way up there. And that's how we manage. Now, I put this in because the other day, Kevin Fielder, CISO of Just Eat, gave a shout out to Mike Jones. If anyone wants a pen tester or a security researcher or whatever, give Mike Jones a call. And the first post was, well, is he CREST accredited? No, he's not. But if you use that logic, that's the better driver because that's Max Verstappen and he's too young to have a driver's license. And sadly, this is what we do. We depend on, oh, they have Cyber Essentials Plus, they have ISO, or he's got a CISM, or he's got a CEH, or he's got an OSCP, whatever it is. If you're hiring people in information security, or if you're creating information security programs, shouldn't you know what you're looking for? Shouldn't you be able to recognize those things? If you're relying on acronyms to do that, you shouldn't be in the position you're in. I'm sorry, I probably just offended half this room. And this is a nice analogy. I believe in hardening stuff from the inside and out. Again, pretty much every big breach we see, you didn't need all the superfluous, expensive security, Blinky Box 9000 stuff. If you just used basic OS controls and file system controls, as long as you did them holistically, you wouldn't have had any chinks in your armor, and you would have been fine. And we talk about resilience, and when we say resilience, we mean recovering from an incident. It's like, no, why don't you just armor your organization so that the rocks bounce off of you? If you're driving down the streets and a bunch of kids are throwing pebbles at you, that's really annoying because your car is going to get messed up. This guy, not concerned, I'm telling you. It's like I'm not worried about threat intelligence because I'm already patched for everything because I've worked with the business and our patches are 100% within 24 hours. This is not currently the case at the university. I'm working on it. But so, oh, we can't do that because it's a legacy system. Okay, it's a legacy system, and what are you going to do? You're going to moan about the legacy system for the next 5 years, and then it's going to get replaced with something that's just as unmaintainable because you never put the process in place. If you're proactive, even though you can't fix it today, put the process in place, and over time, all the bad stuff will get displaced out anyway. So threat intel and detect and respond, yeah, you need some of that. But you want to look out for the guy who's got the anti-tank missile, not chase all the little kids because you don't need to chase them anymore once you've got this armored up. So I'll give an example of what we're doing in Salford. We've got 30,000 users. We've got students, academia, R&D, industry, massively divergent requirements. They like to solution all their own stuff, and they've got egos you could not fit inside this building. Literally, we get service requests. It's like, no, you can't do that. But I do this at home, so I want to do it here. It's a policy violation. I don't care. This works better for me. I'll report it to the vice chancellor if you stop me. That's literally the attitude we get day in and day out. So it's quite a bit of relationship building there. Some are great. Some are great. So we have to build the relationships with those, and they'll eventually convince them. Just go full bore everywhere, and everything will smooth itself out. We have one person who handles all the bullshit, politics, strategy, and creating that process framework of how do we tie all this together. And then we've got a team of 2 people for 30,000. One does ops, basically. He's in the middle of a massive fishing campaign the last 2 days. He's earning his living, which is tiny, because he's 21 years old, and I don't pay him very well. Don't tell him that. And the other one is sitting over there, and his job is basically to do business discovery. Talk to everyone, find out how things are going, and I will tie those together. These are the technical issues we're seeing. This is the business reality. How can we create processes that address those as part of the business instead of building a massive multi-million-pound SOC to constantly chase issues instead? We build a bespoke framework. I read an article that the average spend on security is, oh, there's a sad face looking at me, about 900 pounds per user. Ours is 4, not 400, 4 pounds per user is our security spend. We just go after root causes way upstream: asset management, email, classification, data retention, sanitation, everything. We get into contracts, third-party relationships, how do we forge relationships with other universities, procurement. We get our feet into everything. And the feedback, I just had a quarterly review meeting of all staff, and we're reviewing my staff. And one of the department heads from Media City in Manchester said that the security team was the easiest to deal with and the most responsive team in the entire IT department. So we're definitely not blockers. We try to enable and really build relationships with absolutely everybody. I'll leave you with that. On a sad note, I think the university is probably my last real information security role in the permanent role, because it's just too frustrating. Because we've reached a point where if you do things efficiently, you're immediately disqualified by HR. Oh, we want someone who can manage a budget of 50 million in a team of 50. Okay, but I can do that for $500,000 and 3 people. Oh, well, you're not qualified then. Or you're too proactive. I got fired from my last job because the client requested I be promoted. CISO fired me instead. And that's happened to me 3 times in the last 10 years. I've had 4 engagements, and when I get hired by security organizations to come in and perform an assessment, every single time out of the 4, I've been escorted out of the building after 2 or 3 days because I found too much stuff. This is why the only people I work with are law firms and DPOs, because they actually want to find the stuff, but it's not fun work. You're basically tearing people down, and it's just not enjoyable. The good thing is, 6 months ago, I started speaking a bit, and people seem to like it. And I think it's almost natural, it's part of human nature to resist being challenged and being questioned, and I get it. I feel uncomfortable when people challenge me. The great thing is that people do tend to listen, take in ideas, and then they'll go and spread those ideas. So between that and doing courses, it's people like you guys are actually going to make a much, much bigger difference than I could ever do on my own. So that's brought me from being frustrated about it to finding a way out, and I feel pretty good about that. And I think just for you guys, if you do things more proactively, that kind of ends that whole grind. And that's it. So thank you for listening, and go be amazing.